I don't know why I agreed to watch my uncle's house while he was gone. We'd barely spoken in years, and he was never the warmest guy. But when he called me up, his voice sounded frail and desperate, practically begging me to stay at his place for just a week, maybe two. I thought he'd fallen on hard times or needed company. He never actually explained, but he sounded anxious, even frightened, which made me wonder if he was hiding something. So, there I was, standing in front of my uncle's old, neglected house, my car the only thing on the empty, overgrown driveway. The place looked far more weather-beaten than I remembered. Peeling paint, windows fogged with grime, and a sagging porch that looked like it would collapse with one wrong step. The house stood alone at the edge of a dense forest, with neighbors nowhere in sight, and as I gazed up at it, a chill crept down my spine. The first night was quiet. I went through the house, getting reacquainted with the space. It was a single-story house with a creaky staircase that led to a cramped attic, 3 bedrooms, and a basement I avoided even looking at. There was dust everywhere, as if no one had been here for months. I assumed my uncle had let it go to ruin after my aunt left him years back. But that night, as I was lying in bed, I heard it. A faint, rhythmic tapping, soft but insistent, echoing through the house. I sat up, heart pounding, straining my ears to make sense of it. It sounded like it was coming from beneath me, from the basement. I wanted to brush it off as old pipes or some other harmless explanation, but something about that sound felt wrong. It was too steady, too deliberate. I turned on the bedside lamp, its yellow glow doing little to ease my nerves, and listened, but after a few minutes, the sound stopped and the house fell silent. I managed to fall asleep, though my dreams were filled with shadows and whispers I couldn't understand. The next day, while exploring the house, I found an old leather-bound diary in a drawer in my uncle's bedroom. It looked ancient, the cover cracked and faded. Curiosity got the better of me, and I opened it. The first few entries were ordinary, my uncle's thoughts on the weather, his work, and the occasional memory. But as I read further, the tone changed. The entries grew darker, more erratic. He started writing about strange noises he heard at night. Footsteps when he was alone, whispers that seemed to drift from room to room, and that ever-present tapping, which he described as inhumanly persistent. I read on, a sick feeling churning in my stomach. One entry, dated a few months back, was scrawled in frantic handwriting. My uncle claimed he'd seen something dark and twisted in the basement, watching him from the shadows. It hides in the dark, he'd written, and it's hungry. Don't go downstairs at night. Don't let it see you. A shiver ran through me, but I told myself it was just my uncle's mind playing tricks on him. Maybe he'd started to go senile. Maybe he was just lonely. But that night, the tapping started again, louder and more insistent than before. I buried my head under the pillow, trying to ignore it, but it was like it was getting closer, creeping up the stairs. The following days were no better. I felt like I was being watched. I'd catch glimpses of movement out of the corner of my eye, shadows slinking along the walls, figures lurking just out of sight. I told myself it was just my imagination, that I was letting my uncle's diary get to me, but deep down, I knew something wasn't right. The house itself seemed alive, like it was breathing, watching, waiting. Doors would creak open on their own, and I'd hear soft footsteps when I was alone. Sometimes, in the dead of night, I'd feel a cold presence standing at the foot of my bed, watching me while I lay frozen, too afraid to move. One morning, I went into the living room and found a small child's shoe lying on the floor. It was old, dusty, and didn't look like anything my uncle would own. I picked it up, feeling a strange unease, and threw it in the trash. But the next day, it was back, lying in the same spot as before. Another time, I found a photograph tucked into a dusty book on the shelf. It was a picture of a woman I didn't recognize, standing in front of the house, staring blankly at the camera. She looked worn, sad, and her face seemed blurred, like something had scratched at it. I tried calling my uncle, but he never picked up. I left him a series of frantic voicemails, telling him about the noises, the strange objects, and the feeling that something was watching me, waiting for me to slip up. But he never called back. That night, the tapping started earlier than usual, right as I was getting into bed. It was louder, more intense, echoing through the walls like it was pounding inside my skull. I clutched the sheets, telling myself it was just the house settling, but I knew better. The tapping grew faster, more urgent, until I couldn't take it anymore. I threw open the door, heart pounding, and marched down the stairs, shouting, "What do you want?" The tapping stopped. The silence that followed was thick and suffocating, pressing down on me from all sides. And then, from somewhere deep below, I heard a voice whisper, faint but clear. "Come down," it said, in a voice that sounded almost like my uncle's. Against my better judgment, I felt myself moving toward the basement door. My hand reached for the doorknob, and as I touched it, a jolt of cold shot through me, like I'd been plunged into ice water. My body was trembling, every instinct screaming at me to turn back, but something was pulling me forward, compelling me to go down those stairs. The basement was pitch dark, the kind of darkness that swallows you whole. I fumbled for the light switch, but nothing happened. The bulb must have burned out. I took a hesitant step forward, holding my phone's flashlight out in front of me, its weak beam barely cutting through the gloom. The air was frigid, damp, and the smell of mold was overpowering. And then I saw it. In the far corner of the basement, crouched low, was a figure. It was hunched over, its limbs long and twisted, and as my light hit it, it froze, slowly turning to face me. My blood turned to ice. Its eyes were empty, hollow, but somehow filled with malice. A smile stretched across its face, impossibly wide, showing rows of crooked, yellow teeth. It didn't move, just stared, grinning, like it was waiting for me to do something. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over my own feet, and scrambled up the stairs. I slammed the basement door shut, locking it, and ran back to my room, my heart pounding so loudly I could barely hear anything else. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the corner of my room, clutching my phone like it was a lifeline, listening to the tapping that started up again, as if mocking me. The next morning, I found another entry in the diary, one I hadn't seen before. It was dated the day my uncle left for his trip, and it simply read, "It knows I'm leaving. It's angry. I'm sorry. I didn't mean for this to happen. Don't go downstairs. Don't follow it." That night, the tapping was louder than ever. It echoed through the house, relentless, pounding in time with my racing heart. I covered my ears, trying to block it out, but it only grew louder, like it was inside my head. I snapped. I threw open my bedroom door, marched down the stairs, and flung open the basement door, shouting, "What do you want from me?" The tapping stopped. Silence filled the house, thick and suffocating. And then, a voice whispered from the darkness. "Come down," it said, in a voice that sounded almost like my uncle's. I took a shaky step forward, compelled by a force I couldn't understand. My feet moved on their own, taking me down the stairs, deeper into the dark, until I stood at the bottom, facing the thing that had been haunting me. It smiled at me, wide and sinister, and as I stood frozen in terror, it began to change. Its features twisted, morphing, until it looked like me. I stumbled back, horror flooding my veins. It was like staring into a broken mirror, my own face staring back at me with that unnatural, crooked grin. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. It reached out, its hand brushing my arm, cold and clammy, and I felt a jolt of pain, like something was being ripped out of me. Then everything went black. I don't remember how long I was out. When I woke up, I was back in my room, my mind foggy, my body heavy. I tried to sit up, but a crushing weight held me down. I looked around, and that's when I saw it. In the corner of the room, there it was me, sitting there, watching, grinning. It wore my face, my body, but its eyes were empty, soulless. The grin stretched across its face was wrong, unnatural, like it was unfamiliar with how to use my own muscles. I tried to move, but my body felt paralyzed. I couldn't speak, couldn't scream. All I could do was stare, helpless, as this thing leaned closer. It moved jerkily, like a puppet, its joints creaking, each motion a twisted mockery of human movement. It was like watching myself in a nightmare, distorted and grotesque. It leaned in close, its cold breath brushing against my cheek. I could smell decay, a rotten, moldy stench that made my stomach churn. It whispered in a voice that was almost mine, but colder, hollow, as though it were echoing from somewhere deep within the earth. "Thank you." The words echoed in my mind, filling me with a sense of dread I couldn't shake. I fought to break free, to scream, to do something, but it was like I was trapped in my own body, a prisoner within myself. The thing tilted its head, examining me with a sick fascination, as if it were trying to learn how to be me. Slowly, it straightened up and turned, leaving the room in my own body. I lay there, paralyzed and helpless, listening as it moved around the house, taking its time. I heard my own footsteps echoing through the hallway, down the stairs, into the kitchen. I could only lie there, trapped in darkness and silence, as it wandered my uncle's home, free to do as it pleased. Hours passed. I don't know how long I lay there, slipping in and out of consciousness, my mind filled with flashes of the thing wearing my face, its grin stretching wider each time I closed my eyes. Eventually, exhaustion took over, and I drifted into a fitful sleep, plagued by nightmares. When I finally woke up, I could move again. My body felt weak and numb, like I'd been lying there for days. I forced myself up, every muscle aching, and stumbled to the bathroom. When I looked in the mirror, I barely recognized myself. My skin was pale, almost gray, and dark circles ringed my eyes, which looked sunken and hollow. I splashed water on my face, trying to wake up fully, but the cold only made me feel more disoriented. As I stood there trying to make sense of what was happening, I noticed something strange on the mirror. There were words, faint but unmistakable, scrawled in what looked like my own handwriting. "It's your turn now." My heart skipped a beat, and a wave of nausea washed over me. I stumbled back, feeling a sense of dread rising within me. What did it mean? What turn? And then I heard it, the soft, rhythmic tapping coming from the basement, louder than ever. I wanted to run, to get as far away from this place as possible, but some twisted compulsion drew me to that sound. I felt a pull, like an invisible hand was guiding me back toward the basement, urging me to face whatever was waiting below. I stepped carefully, each creak of the floorboards echoing through the silent house. The air was thick, oppressive, pressing down on me with every step. When I reached the basement door, I hesitated, my hand hovering over the doorknob. A cold sweat broke out across my forehead, and every instinct screamed at me to turn back. But something deeper, something darker, kept pushing me forward. I twisted the doorknob and slowly pulled the door open, revealing the stairs descending into the blackness below. The tapping stopped, replaced by an eerie silence that made my skin crawl. I held my breath, took a step down, then another, my heartbeat pounding in my ears. As I descended, the darkness seemed to close in around me, swallowing me whole. I flicked on my phone's flashlight, casting a small, weak beam of light that barely cut through the gloom. When I reached the bottom of the stairs, I froze. The basement was empty. No strange figure, no twisted reflection. Just the cold, damp air and the faint smell of mold. But then, something caught my eye. There was a mirror on the far wall, one I hadn't noticed before, covered in a thick layer of dust. My feet moved on their own, pulling me closer, my breath shallow and uneven. I wiped a shaky hand across the glass, clearing just enough to see my own reflection staring back at me. But it wasn't my reflection. Not really. It was the thing that had taken my place. It grinned back at me, its eyes hollow, empty pits, filled with a malice that sent a chill through my bones. As I stared, it began to move, its body twisting and contorting, until its grin stretched impossibly wide, its teeth jagged and yellow, dripping with something dark and viscous. "Your turn," it whispered, and suddenly, I felt a force pulling me toward the mirror, like gravity itself was working against me. My feet dragged across the floor, closer and closer to the glass. I tried to fight, to pull away, but the force was too strong, too overwhelming. My hand reached out, almost of its own accord, touching the cold surface of the mirror. It felt like ice, burning against my skin, and as I pressed my hand against the glass, it gave way, like stepping into freezing water. The next thing I knew, I was on the other side. I looked around, heart racing, and realized I was no longer in the basement. The world around me was dark, distorted, filled with strange shadows and shapes that seemed to writhe and twist in the corners of my vision. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. I was trapped, my voice lost in the suffocating silence. I turned to look back at the mirror, and that's when I saw it. The thing wearing my face was staring at me from the other side, still grinning, its eyes cold and empty. It raised a hand, waving mockingly, before turning and walking away, leaving me alone in this twisted, nightmarish version of my uncle's basement. Panic surged through me as I pounded on the glass, shouting, begging for it to let me out, but the thing just kept walking, its laughter echoing faintly in my mind. I was trapped, a prisoner in a world of shadows, while it walked free, wearing my skin, living my life. Days, weeks, months passed. Time lost all meaning in that place, where there was no day, no night, only endless, suffocating darkness. I watched helplessly as the thing went about my life, imitating me, laughing with my friends, visiting my family, using my voice to tell lies. No one ever suspected a thing. And then one day it returned. I felt its presence before I saw it, a chill that seeped into my bones, filling me with a dread I couldn't escape. It stood on the other side of the mirror, watching me with that same twisted grin, its eyes filled with a hunger that made my skin crawl. "Your turn," it whispered, its voice echoing through the darkness, mocking me. And then it vanished, leaving me alone in that suffocating silence once again. Now I understand what it meant, back in that room, when it said thank you. I was never supposed to leave. It had been waiting for someone to take its place, to set it free. And now, I am here, trapped, waiting for someone else to make the same mistake, to come down those stairs, to touch that mirror, to take my place.